On the G20, you were there meeting some of the leaders as well. Professor Schwab, what do you make of the result? Finally, they put something as a statement, and it seems quite positive with all the voices included.
I think it's positive. It's already positive through the fact that everybody agreed about the statement, which we haven't had the last years. Now, the base has been formed, but we have to go one step further. We have to have a strategic mood. We have to construct the world of tomorrow. It's a systemic transformation of the world. So we have to define how the world should look like, which we want to come out of this transformation period.
Before we go to how the world will be described, China-US top leadership meeting on the sideline of the G20 summit. Many say this is certainly a step forward. How much of a window opportunity would that provide us, do you see?
I'm very optimistic, and I feel it was a very positive outcome because the two sides reconfirmed that they would like to cooperate again, each with another. I think...
and mechanism being established.
And mechanism being established. But now there are many issues, of course, environment, of course, the food crisis, and so on, where we need concrete cooperation. And that's now in the next steps, which we have to develop. But I think the two leaders and all the leaders assembled in Bali, I think feel now it's a time to look forward and to really put emphasis again on cooperation and not on confrontation.
We also feel that in the APEC this year, both the leaders meeting and also the APEC CEO Summit, you just spoken at the opening panel, Professor. So how do you see we would be able to, with our capability, to carry on this kind of discussion in the right direction, as you put it earlier?
We have to define the specific elements of the global system. For example, nature and environment, climate change, and then to see what are actually the areas where we can make true progress, where we can have a real impact. I just take climate change. I mean, it's such a complex issue. It concerns not only the reduction of CO2 in industries, it's a change of lifestyle. We need substantial innovation. We have to look for nature-based solutions. For example, I'm very glad that China is integrated into our initiative to plant 1 trillion trees in the next 10 years by making its own contribution. So it's a whole, let's say...
a holistic...
a panoply of issues. And for each issue, we have to try with a collaborative platform where we integrate the best people, the most relevant people, and then to work for progress.
Professor Schwab, I understand you have been writing a new book called The Great Narrative. And I also understand it's going to be in Chinese. Many readers are looking forward to read it. But, tell me more about how do you see the nature of great narrative with many of the challenges you just mentioned?
If we define first what the great narrative is, I think we have seen already before the crisis that we have to develop a world which is more resilient. We have to be resilient against crises like the climate crisis and so on. A world which is much more sustainable. We cannot destroy the nature endlessly, and we have to reduce temperatures to what we have agreed upon in the Paris Agreement, which means 1.5 centigrades. Otherwise, our children and grandchildren will have much worse lives than we have. And we have to make the world more inclusive. And all this we have to do through collaboration. That's the narrative. So we now looking forward, when we restructure the world, when we reshape the world, we always have to keep those objectives in mind.
From years of discussion at the World Economic Forum, nothing about great narrative is being formed easily. It's always years after years discussion and adjustments, as well as go with the wind in a way, with the smartness that make things happen. So you went through, Professor, with the World Economic Forum, the Cold War era and the end of the Cold War era. And now probably we're in another great transition. But you went through this, so maybe there are something that you went through could help us today to be more patient and to be more capable in listening to the others.
I think key is to preserve optimism and not to be fearful. If I look at the 50 years now, I have been part of global developments. Actually, humankind is much better off today, despite all the crises which we had. Just look at your country, how much it has eradicated poverty. And I could give you many other examples. For example, alphabetism was a big issue 50 years ago. Now it nearly has disappeared. We have life expectancy has increased on a global level by 12 years. So there are many men, when we look back, we just can say the world has got better. And it will, if we don't destroy it, it will get better even in the future. I think that's the nature of human beings. But we have to
What is the nature of human beings?
The nature of human beings is to look in generational terms and to strive that the next generation is better off than we are off. And the means to do so change. Today, we need much more cooperation compared to the past because we are much more interconnected compared to the past.
Since China just wrapped up the 20th Party Congress, the CPC National Congress, and there are clear goals being stated about the country's development and how it's going to deal with the rest of the world. So let me throw in some of these issues with you. One is a higher level of opening up. You witnessed from the very beginning of China's reform and opening up as a result of cooperation between China and the World Economic Forum. How do you see this promise of higher level of opening up?
I came first to China in '79, just when the first opening up started. I think the new opening up should aim particularly at two things. Helping countries which are still left behind to achieve the level of development China has achieved. And second, I think with the new technologies, with the fourth industrial revolution, we have to make sure that we do not go into a technology war, but that we work together. And China is based on its own technological progress, very well equipped to do so, that we work together to make sure that those technologies serve all human beings on Earth and are not used in a combative manner.
The other thing about China is, according to the Party Congress, Chinese way to modernization or Chinese path to modernization. Now, of course, this is up to interpretation while things are happening because China is still heading toward modernization. But Professor, from your perspective, how do you understand this ambition of China to have the Chinese path toward modernization and share it with the developing world?
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years. I think it's a role model for many countries, but I think also we should leave it to each country to make its own decision what system it wants to adopt. And I think we should be very careful in imposing systems. But the Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
Chinese President Xi Jinping back in the year 2017 delivered a speech at the World Economic Forum's annual conference. And that speech has been having its echoing since then. Professor, how do you see China's transformation? Many would wonder, since this is really 5 years since then. And how would you compare your impressions then to now?
It was a historical speech because it showed Chinese commitment to multilateralism, and I think it was very important. Now we are in a new situation, and I look very much forward, and we have seen it, of course, at the Party Congress. I look very much forward to have a strong Chinese voice in Davos to explain even better to the world what it means the Party Congress, which laid down the principles of the policy, what it really means for global collaboration and for global development.
Among many of the initiatives brought over by the Party Congress in terms of international relations and global development, there's one thing called Global Development Initiative.
I have seen it.
And of course, earlier there was also talks about Global Security Initiative. Now, Professor, this, according to China's leadership, is complementary to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So how do you see these initiatives based on earlier practices? There were initiatives of Belt and Road and other things coming from China with the international community. To what way shall we be able to nurture and create together?
I think first it's very important to take such initiatives because we have to show a path to the future. And we have to do it on a national and we have to do it on a global level. Then I think it's very important that we make sure that those initiatives really get global support. Because I come back to the point which is so important, it's only through global collaboration. And we know that the global system depends very much on regional pillars, if I may say so. But we have to avoid that we have only two pillars. The world will be on a much more stable situation if all countries can become pillars of the same, let's say, collaborative system which allows different ways, but at the end provides a common approach.
So you are saying more efforts can be assembled as a result of an initiative like this?
Exactly, and each of those initiatives can bring in new aspects, and in such a way everybody will benefit from it.
Recently we see the visit by Chancellor of Germany, for example, to China makes a new page, some say, about the discussion between China and Europe. Now, Professor, I know you're having a global vision, but at the same time you're based in Europe. How do you see this potential of China, Europe, and China multilateral voices in a way?
I'm watching with great satisfaction that during the pandemic and now also with the war which we have at the borders of the European Union has become more unified. And we should not forget that Europe is still, in terms of trade, in terms also of economic power, it's one of the big powers in the world. So I'm very pleased that we speak not only about Chinese-US relations, but also again about European-Chinese relations. And I feel, despite all the question marks and to a certain extent cautious approach which we see in Europe, I think that very close ties can be established again between China and Europe, because there's such an interwoven economy. And so I'm very pleased if we can make progress in European-Chinese cooperation.
Professor Schwab, as always, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the next time.